As we said, we will be studying this morning from James chapter 3. If you would like to go ahead and turn in your Bibles, we'll read the first 12 verses to kind of help us get the context of what we're speaking about there. So it's James chapter 3, beginning with verse 1. It says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder, wherever the pilot desires. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt, water, and fresh." So last week we began our study in looking at the proper attitude toward the use of the tongue. In the first two verses, we find warnings to those who would be teachers. And we spent a lot of time looking at those first two verses last week, or actually the first verse. We spoke how that at first glance that this may seem to conflict with the admonition that all mature Christians should be willing and able to teach in Hebrews chapter 5 in verse 12. But what we saw here is what James is actually condemning is those who are seeking the title of teacher, not those who out of good faith and good conscience and good motives would want to teach other people, but those who are actually looking for the title or the position, the prestige of being called teacher. And that really is what James seems to be condemning here. It's wonderful to have zeal to teach others. It's a good thing to have that desire and that ability and that drive to teach other people. We just need to make sure our motives are pure. Our motives are, not personal, but for God. We want to expand His kingdom. We want to help other people. We want to teach them what they need to do so that they can be saved and not eternally lost. And so that should be the proper motive of any who would want to be a teacher. And so we should desire to be a teacher. We should strive to be a teacher, but in doing so, as we discussed last week, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of study and preparation. And we need to be sure that what we are doing is for the glory of God and not for our own personal glory, but for God's glory. I know we had a lot of comments last week. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add or anything that they'd like to bring up before we continue on in our study this week? So as we continue on there, looking at the first verse, we understand that since teachers have greater influence, therefore they also carry greater responsibility. As a teacher, one has a great amount of influence over those who are teaching, whether it's in those whom he or she are teaching, whether it's in a public situation like this or in a private situation. There's a great amount of influence over those that we are teaching. Just as an elder must give answer for the souls under his care, we see this in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 17. So just as an elder must give answer for the souls under his care, a teacher must give answer to those he is trying to lead. And if he leads those people astray, he must give answer for that. The responsibility is greater because the opportunity for influence is greater. Therefore, a teacher must guard his words. and must teach only the things that he knows to be the truth. One who teaches a perverted gospel will receive great condemnation. If we look at Galatians chapter 1, we'll read verses 6 through 8. It says, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another. But there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than that which we have preached to you, let him be accursed. And so we must, as we go about trying to teach other people, we must ensure that the gospel that we are teaching is the pure gospel, the gospel that was revealed by the Holy Spirit to the apostles, and therefore they then taught others, and it was recorded for us through the providence of God. We must make sure that we are teaching that pure gospel, because anything else will cause us to be accursed, and we don't want to end up in that situation. In Matthew chapter 18, verses 6 and 7, here we have Christ speaking. He said, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him for a millstone to be hung around his neck, and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe to the world because of offenses, for offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. And so here we see Christ using some pretty graphic words, he's illustrating this in a pretty graphic manner. He's talking about one who is trying to lead maybe a young Christian, someone that's young in the faith. They may or may not be young physically in years, but here you have this little one, this young Christian, and you lead them away. And Christ says it would be better for a millstone, this huge stone, to be hung around this person's neck and him be thrown into the sea, into the water, and drowned. And that's a pretty graphic image there, but yet it gets the point across. This is the responsibility that we have as teachers. This is the condemnation that we will be under if we lead people astray. And therefore, we must make sure that as we go about trying to teach and to help other people, that we are teaching the pure gospel, that we are not leading someone astray, whether it be intentionally or unintentionally. We need to make sure that we are preaching only the gospel and not some perverted form of the gospel. Any comments or anything along that line?
Imagine the amount of teaching that's out there. I guess what I'm describing is things that people who may not be here anymore, things that they taught that are on tapes, recorded, and may not have been right.
Yeah.
So once, there's the seriousness of it. Once it's out there and you teach it, whether it's, audible or if it's written, and it gets, it's everywhere now. You can't get it back. You just think about that when people do things that you can't reel those things back in normally. It's just, it's out there. There's no possible way. Now you can make it right. You can try to, hey, that wasn't correct. That wasn't right. What I was teaching. You can do your best to try to make it right that way, but it's out there for people to listen to.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that just goes along with the danger of the tongue and some of these other things that we'll speak about, Lord willing, this morning or next week. Just even anything that we say with our tongue, it's hard to reel those things back in. And it, like you said, it doesn't necessarily even have to be on tape or written. I mean, you could have a visitor here; they could leave, and we are never able to get that back. We don't know where they go. And they could be spreading that same misinformation. And so it's a very, very serious thing we undertake when we start teaching. And it's an obligation, I think, in a lot of ways to many of us. But we still need to take it seriously, and we need to try to be prepared to the best of our ability. Any other comments or anything along those lines? So that kind of finishes up verse 1. As we continue on there in verse 2, it says, for we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. So verse 1 seems to be directed more towards teachers. As we come into verse 2, it seems like James, cast the net a little wider and broadened his application to everyone and admonishes everyone to be wary of the temptations of the tongue. Teachers, as we said, especially need to do this. Yet the admonition here is not only limited to those who are teachers. If you look at the language, it says, "For we all stumble." So it's not just teachers that stumble, but we all stumble. And then he also says there, "If anyone does not stumble." And so here we have the language of we all do this, if anyone does not do this. And so he broadens the scope here a little bit in verse 2, and he begins to bring in everyone into what he is teaching here. So he states the fact that we all stumble in respect to many things. Of course, this is reiterated other places in the Scriptures. If you look at Romans chapter 3 and verse 23, a familiar passage to, I'm sure most of us in here, "For we all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." And so we all stumble. We all at times fall short of the glory of God, and we need to make those things right and correct those in a proper manner. In 1 John 1 and verse 8, it says, "If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us." And so here, James is just reiterating what is taught in other places, that we are all susceptible to make mistakes. We are all susceptible to stumble, and so we need to be wary. We need to be on guard. We need to be trying to prevent that if all possible, because as Jeremy pointed out, sure, we all make mistakes, but we don't know how far that mistake will eventually go. And we need to make sure that if at all possible, and it is possible, that we don't commit those mistakes. So we stumble from a sinless life in many ways, but if we can control our tongue, it is proof that we have become mature, that we have matured spiritually in our service to God. And that's what we are striving for. We are striving to be mature, a mature Christian, and one that can control his tongue. The word perfect here does not signify sinlessness. What it signifies, if you look at the definition here as well as in other places, it's used to describe one who is spiritually mature. And so we need to strive to be perfect, we need to strive to be sinless, but we also need to strive to be mature. A person who is able to encounter situations and not only control our tongue, but control our actions, control our attitudes, control how we react to different situations. And you see someone who is able to control that, and much of that, as we will see, is led by what we are saying. You see someone who is able to control those things, and you see someone who is a spiritually mature person. And so that's how it's used to describe that here, a mature person here, as one who is perfect. This is true in as much as it requires greater effort to keep the tongue always under control than any other part of the body. And I think the language used here in these verses proves that. And it states that the tongue is the hardest part of our body to control. And so when we find someone who is able to do that, then we have found someone who is spiritually mature. When it is determined the direction in which a man's tongue is pointing, it's easy to determine the direction in which that man himself is going. And so that is a good indication of the direction that we are traveling and how we are using our tongue. And it doesn't take very long in speaking with someone to understand the direction in which they are traveling. Matthew chapter 12, verses 34 through 37. Here again, we have Christ speaking. It says, "Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good man, out of the good treasure of his heart, brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." And so as we speak with others and as others speak with us, then they can understand the direction in which our lives are taking, and they can understand what sort of person we are. Have you ever been speaking with a stranger, maybe it's in a business setting or something like that, and you notice that something's a little different about them, and then, as the conversation continues, you find out that they're a member of the church? Have you ever had that happen? You didn't know this person before that conversation, but during that conversation, you could just tell by the way that they were speaking that they were a member of the church. And you ask them, I knew something was different about you just by the way you were speaking. And so others ought to be able to recognize that about us as we go about our daily lives at school, at work, wherever, as we're shopping, at the grocery store, wherever we are, our tongue needs to be telling others who we are, that we are Christians, and the direction our life is taking is that Christ wants, and the direction that He is leading us through the Scriptures. So controlling our tongue is evidence, as we said, of great self-control. So when we see someone who is able to control their tongue, at that point we have the knowledge that they're able to control their whole body. Since they're able to control their tongue, which is the hardest part of the body to control, then we have that knowledge that, hey, this person is able also to control their whole body. So James says by implication that it takes, as we said, greater effort to control the tongue than it does any other member of the body. And so this is not to say that we shouldn't make efforts to control other parts of our body. I think we should. We if we just totally disregard other parts of the body, then maybe we might fail in some point there. But what we are saying here is if we have the ability to control our tongue, we've won a huge battle in doing that, because that's the one we need to get under control first. Once we get that under control, then we're able to direct the rest of our body, and he will point this out in some of the language that he uses as we continue on in our study. And so that takes us here to verses 3 and 4. So here we have the tongue compared to other small but powerful things. He says there in verse 3, "Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires." And so we see and we understand that a horse is this very large, muscular, powerful animal. Many of us in here, maybe all of us, have stood beside a horse. And a horse is a big animal. And in a lot of ways, for someone like me who is not accustomed to being around horses a lot, it can be kind of a scary thing to be standing beside this huge animal that has all this power and this ability to move great heavy things and in some ways just stomp us in the ground. And so it can be intimidating sometimes to go up to this animal, to approach it. But yet it can be controlled by a small, frail child that sits on its back. Once it has that bit in its mouth and they're able to turn that, we see small children controlling these huge animals. And once you have that bit, that small thing, you can turn that huge animal wherever you want it to go and make it do things that it doesn't necessarily want to do. But yet you have that ability because of the bit. You look at a large ship, which holds several hundreds of people and hundreds of tons of cargo, and you see these things. I've been several times down at the port there in Mobile when we go down there for a trade show, and it's right there, right next to the state port. And you look out the back of that building and you see these huge cargo ships going by, and it looks like for 5 minutes they're going by. They're so big with all these containers just full of stuff. And so this huge ship that in our minds is really incomprehensible, the amount of cargo and things they can hold and can carry, they are turned by this small rudder. And so here, at the impulse of this man sitting in the pilot's house or whatever they call it, and he's turning this little wheel, and it's connected to this thing on the back. And this whole huge thing begins to turn, and he puts it where he wants it to go. And so both the spirited animal and this large ship can be controlled by a relatively small but powerful instrument. Likewise, if we are able to exercise control over our tongues, it can govern our whole being. It can take our whole being where we want it to go. The person at the rudder of the ship, he's still able to make that boat go where he wants it to go, even as the wind presses against it, even as the waves are coming against it. He still has power to direct that ship. And so likewise, just as the ship's pilot cannot control the wind, we may not be able to control the things that are coming against us. We may not be able to control always the things that are tempting us, the desires that we have, and what's going to offer that temptation. And we can't control what's coming at us. But yet we can control the direction and the reaction we have to those things. We can, just like the pilot, we can control the ship. And we need to endeavor to do that. It is up to us to realize that these small things, these bridles, these rudders, these tongues, determine the destiny of these larger things. The horses, the ships, and us as people and as Christians trying to live godly lives. So both illustrations demonstrate how a small member like the tongue can control a larger body. So, we look at this and we look at examples of this, how our tongue controls our body. If we begin to speak lies, we say this lie, we begin to speak lies, again, we've got to cover that up with other lies usually. And then before we know it, we begin living a lie. We're living this lie because our tongue began to speak these lies. If we speak suggestively in an immoral manner, we start saying these immoral, maybe crude things, we start speaking that, those things start coming across our tongue. Before long, we will probably be living in an immoral manner. And so we need to control what we say, because the tongue will lead us. It's the power of the tongue to direct us is great. And as we begin doing these things and taking part in these things, with our tongues, eventually the rest of our body will follow. The danger of the tongue and the power of the tongue is easily applied to the dangers of teaching and false teaching. A teacher's speech can easily set the mood of the congregation. So as a teacher is up here before the congregation, teaching and trying to lead the congregation in a study, the speech that the teacher is saying can lead the mood. It can direct the congregation, it can encourage, or it can bring down the congregation. And therefore, there's a huge amount of responsibility there. A tongue can lead the congregation in a way that will be uplifting, but it can also lead the congregation in a way that will be discouraging and would bring the congregation down. James chapter 3 and verse 5 as we continue on. Well, before we continue on there, does anybody have any comments? I've gone over a good bit there. Does anyone have any comments before we move on to the next passage? All right, James chapter 3 and verse 5. It says, "Even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles." So this small member boasts great things. And he compares this to a small fire kindling an entire forest. So the same spark that kindles a fire whereby we are warmed in the winter can also kindle a whole forest. And so the weather they're predicting in the upcoming week, a lot of us, this would be a very appropriate analogy, I think, as we come up on some single degree temperatures. And, some of us in our homes may be lighting fires in order to stay warm. And that fire that we light that projects that heat is very beneficial in keeping us warm. I'm sure all of us have stood beside a fire or sat beside a fire and was warmed in some very cold situations. And so, that's very beneficial. But that same fire that we may have on this cold night out in the forest, if we let that thing get out of control, it can be an inferno and can destroy thousands of acres of forest if we let that get out of control and we don't properly use that. So the tongue can cause great sin if we let it get out of control. It can destroy families, it can split churches, it can begin wars between nations, all because someone was reckless and they used the tongue in a way that they shouldn't. They may not even be reckless. Some people have, it's a very directed thing, something they've thought about, and they're using their tongue to lead people in a way that they shouldn't go. And so this uncontrolled, this reckless use of the tongue, it can have some very grave consequences. In the illustration of the horse and the bridle, the ship and the rudder, there is controlled effect. You're controlling this thing. You're leading it where you want it to go. With the fire, the result could be uncontrolled chaos with terrible and devastating consequences. And we've seen this in the past. It has been said, some of us, maybe not all of us, I haven't read it, but I'm familiar with the book Mein Kampf, which that's the book that Hitler wrote as he was coming to power in Germany. It is said that for every word in that book, Mein Kampf, that 125 lives were lost in World War II. And so as he began spreading his, I don't know exactly what you would call it, I don't know if there's words really evil enough to describe it, but his agenda, his so-called doctrine, I guess, it began to take hold and it began to spread in Germany, and that got out of control, and it embroiled the world in this conflict. And so for every word in that book, 125 lives were lost. Millions of people lost their lives because this man began leading this country with his words. And so words can be very powerful. They have power, and people who know how to wield words in a way that begin to control and turn people, they many times understand the power that they have with those words. And I believe Hitler had that understanding, and he used that to his benefit, but to the detriment of the rest of the world. So even as the tongue can be capable of great harm, it can also be capable of great good. And so that's the case with many of the things that we have here on earth. These things that have the ability to do great harm, we can do great good with those things. Just as we talk about, we look out throughout history, just the printing press. Through the printing press, everyone was able to have a copy of the Bible for themselves. But yet through the printing press, you have something like Hitler writing his book and spreading his dogma. And so while the printing press was able to do a lot of good, it's also able to do a lot of evil. In our day, we look at the internet and the things that we're able to do there. Just with the push of a button, we're able to send, just about anything we want to, as far as print, audio, video, all those things that we can use to spread the gospel. I can hit a button right here, and then in just a couple of seconds, someone in Africa can have access to that material. And so the amount of good that can be done with that is just really incomprehensible. But yet on the same foot, or the other foot, we have the amount of evil that comes from the internet, with all that's wrapped up with that. And so that's the same with the tongue. We can do a lot of good but we can do a lot of evil as well. Proverbs 18 and verse 21, it says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." So death and life are in the power of the tongue. So that shows you the two sides of how we can use our tongue. We can use it for good, or we can use it for evil. Another great example that we have here, I say it's a great example. It's an example. It's not good. It's not great in any way. But an example that we can see of this here in our society, even as we speak, is the mental health system in this country. And how that you have so-called professionals within that system using their tongues to do great evil when they have the opportunity to do great good. You know, young people go into these institutions with these ideas that they're confused with gender, they're confused with their sexuality, and things of that nature. And so they go into these institutions to get help. And instead of being met with people who try to help them overcome these things, what they are met with are people who are going to help them continue in these delusions and continue in these paths that are really detrimental to themselves and their mental health in general. And these people not only, you know, you have people who are willingly do this, but you have the system itself. These people in these institutions are required to do it. This is what they are required to do in our country, is to not really help these young people, but yet to embrace them in their confusion and to help carry them along down that path. You know, they could say things like, well, I understand you have these feelings, but let me help you work through them. Let me show you this. Let me show you why this is not really what the situation is. Let me help you understand what you need to be doing. And let me help you understand how to overcome these things. And here is a path that you can go down that will help you get out of this situation. But instead, kids go in there and the professionals, they all pretend that these kids have the ability to change their gender just in their minds and snap a finger. And you walk even into an emergency room type situation, and all of a sudden all the nurses and everything are calling your daughter he and him. These doctors are coming in saying these things. They're using their tongue to uphold the delusion that this young person has that they are no longer a boy, no longer a girl, they're a boy now. And they're required to do so. They participate instead of helping. When a parent calls and asks to speak to their daughter, instead of participating in this delusion and asking to speak to their son, they are spoken to rudely, and in a lot of ways, contemptuously. And these people are professionals. These people have doctorate degrees. They understand biology. They understand all of these things. They understand that there's no way, no matter how many surgeries, no matter how many hormones this person takes, they are never really going to be the other gender. And they understand this, but yet they're all playing this game. They're using their tongues to lead these young people down this path. And it's a very evil thing. Because these girls are never going to be boys. They're never truly going to be boys. These boys are never truly going to be girls, and they need to deal with that. They need to understand that. They need to work their ways through that. We don't need to be using our tongues to help pretend like they are. Because it's never going to be that way. And so this is something that I believe all of us in here are going to have to battle as we come in contact with these people. And we need to do so in a loving manner. As we deal with this, I mean, we have no right to be hateful. We have no right to be rude. We have no right to be degrading to these people who are struggling with these issues, because that would be using the tongue in a very evil manner as well. But yet, we have no right to participate in it. You know, if we use our tongues in an angry manner, you know, we're doing something just as evil. But yet, in a loving manner, we have the obligation to try to explain and try to lead these people in the opposite direction. And this is a problem we will face. We will have to uphold the truth in a loving manner. And we can't participate in this evil, in this, I don't know exactly what you would call it, this trend to imagine that you are things that you are not. God made us. He made us male and female. I understand some may have feelings that was a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. And so we need help dealing with that if we're confused. And we can use our words to help people do that and not condone people who are doing that. And so as we are confronted with people, and someone may come up to you today, and you need to be getting ready for it. And they may say, you may say something, well, she is doing this, and they're going to say, well, his pronouns are he, him. Has anyone in here been faced with that as of yet?
I have, Chase.
How are you going to react to that? You need to get prepared. You need to get prepared, because you're going to have a choice there. You're going to have a choice to make. And how you react to that, your tongue is going to lead you. You need to get prepared for that. What are you going to say? How are you going to speak the truth in love in that moment? You need to be prepared. Because if you haven't been faced with that yet, it's coming. If the world continues, it's coming. It may be in your own family. It may be at work. It may be at school. It may be in the grocery store. It's coming. If the world continues to stand, you need to be prepared. And so that's a mature Christian. That's what a mature Christian does. We endeavor to prepare our tongues to speak those things that are going to do the most good. And what does the most good? In a lot of ways, it's hard to understand. And then sometimes I've been in a situation where I just don't know what to say. And simply I said, I wish I had the words to make you understand. I wish you knew how much I loved you. And sometimes that may be all we can say. But we need to be prepared. We need to be ready. Any other comments or anything along that line? The first part of verse 6, it says, "And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body." So again, we have the tongue that is compared to a fire that is out of control. So in this, we see a lot of things when we look at the tongue and we're comparing it to a fire. Many of us, if not all of us, have been witness to a huge fire, whether maybe it's our own home or a neighbor's home being burned. Some of us, I've been in situations where we piled up, some brush almost as big as this room, and we lit it. And just to see the destruction and the power of that fire is just really awe-inspiring. But the tongue has that power. It has and we can see that in the pain that it inflicts, the destruction that accompanies it, and the effects that follow it. We can witness that when we compare it to the fire. Backbiting, gossip, slander, and malicious words can cause great harm to an individual, and even sow discord among the congregation. And just as Jeremy said at the beginning of the class, where we're teaching something and we may not have we don't have the ability to draw all that back in. All of these other misuses of the tongue and this gossip and backbiting and slander, all these things, once they are out, you can't reel those things back in. You can work to the best of your ability to make correction, to do what you can to pull them back in, but you're never going to completely get those things back in. It's kind of like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. You might get some of it, but you're not going to get all of it back in there. It's that difficult once we say these words. Proverbs chapter 26, beginning with verse 18. It says, like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. As charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like nasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. Fervent lips with a wicked heart are like the earthenware covered with silver dross. He who hates disguises it with his lips and lays up deceit within himself. When he speaks kindly, do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. And so as we conclude our study this morning, and Lord willing, next week we'll continue with these thoughts as we go about our week this week. Let's think about this. A lot of times we are in situations and we don't know how to de-escalate that situation. We don't know how to put out this fire that's burning. Well, a lot of times it may just be as simple as taking the wood away from the fire. Get the fuel out of there. And that's, a lot of times that's what our tongues do. That we're adding wood to the fire, we're adding fuel to the fire, and sometimes we may need to just shut up and get the wood out of there. And so as we go throughout the week and as we think about our lesson for next week, let's think about those things. How many times would it have been better for us just to hush and take the wood away? That's what a mature Christian understands. He knows when to do that. I appreciate everyone's attention, those who participate. Thank you so much for the comments. And as we said, Lord willing, we'll pick up there in verse 6 of James chapter 3 next week.